On the evening of September the 6th of 2012, Faith Hedgepeth, a 19-year-old student at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, attended an event for the campus chapter of Alpha Pi Omega, a sorority of which she was a prospective member. She and her roommate, Karena Rosario, subsequently went to the library to study together before heading out to a nightclub in downtown Chapel Hill shortly after midnight. By 3 a.m., Hedgepeth and Rosario had returned to their apartment. A neighbor later reported hearing 3 loud thumping noises, which she described as being like a heavy bag being dropped or furniture being overturned. About an hour later, Rosario left to spend the remainder of the night and early morning with another acquaintance, believing Hedgepeth to be asleep in her room. Upon her return home shortly before 11 a.m. the next morning, Rosario came upon Hedgepeth's bloodied body, wrapped in a quilt. Her cause of death was ruled as blunt force trauma to the head, inflicted with an empty liquor bottle. She'd also reportedly been abused by her killer. At the onset of the ensuing homicide investigation, detectives looked into Rosario's former boyfriend, Eric Takoy Jones, as a person of interest. The young man had a history of domestic violence and had previously issued a threat against Hedgepeth for her alleged influence over Rosario's decision to end their relationship. However, Jones was ultimately ruled out as a possible suspect, as his DNA did not match the mixture recovered from the crime scene. The case subsequently went cold until September of 2021, when investigators linked a 28-year-old Durham resident named Miguel Salguero Olivares to the crime. The latter had been arrested for drunk driving the previous month, after which his DNA samples were uploaded to a law enforcement database and matched to Hedgepeth's killer. Few other details were released in the aftermath of Salguero Olivares' arrest. The Chapel Hill police chief indicated in a public statement that they were working to sort out the various layers of the investigation and that the story will take time to completely unfold. Number 5. Stephen Lawrence. At the age of 18, Stephen Lawrence from Plumstead in southeast London was viciously murdered in a racially motivated attack on April the 22nd of 1993. The young man had been waiting for a late-night bus near Grove Park with his friend, Dwayne Brooks, when he was suddenly engulfed by 6 white youths. The assailants unleashed a barrage of racial slurs at Lawrence before forcing him to the ground and plunging a 5-inch blade into his right collarbone and left shoulder. The stab wounds reportedly severed the victim's axillary arteries and penetrated a lung, causing him to lose all feeling in his right arm. Brooks fled the scene and called for Lawrence to follow him, after which the attackers disappeared down Dixon Road. After running about 130 yards, Lawrence collapsed to the ground. Brooks went to call an ambulance, while an off-duty police officer came upon the scene and covered Lawrence with a blanket. The team was taken to Brooke General Hospital, where he was pronounced dead. A pathologist subsequently recorded that Lawrence's ability to run as far as he did while suffering from a collapsed lung had been a testimony to his physical fitness. Following a preliminary investigation, 6 suspects were arrested but never charged in connection to the murder. The case gained international notoriety and led to the Metropolitan Police Service receiving heavy criticism for its incompetent handling of the investigation and perceived institutional racism. In 2005, the rule against double jeopardy was repealed in instances of murder, allowing the suspects to be tried for Lawrence's killing despite their prior acquittal. The following year, a cold case review was opened, involving a full re-examination of the case's forensic evidence. Finally, in May of 2011, Gary Dobson and David Norris, 2 of the original suspects, were rearrested and charged with murder. They were ultimately convicted, and because of their status as juveniles when the crime occurred, were sentenced to detention at Her Majesty's pleasure, equivalent to a life sentence for an adult. Number 4. Lindy Sue Beechler. Shortly before 9 p.m. on December the 5th of 1975, the family of 19-year-old Lindy Sue Beechler returned to their home in Manor Township, Pennsylvania, to find the grisly aftermath of a cold-blooded murder. Beechler had reportedly been stabbed more than 19 times following an intense physical struggle that tracked blood throughout the house. There was a knife protruding from the teen's neck that had been taken from the kitchen. The resulting homicide investigation experienced little progress for the better part of 5 decades. In 2019, Parabon Nanolabs released a composite sketch of the suspect in Beechla's murder based on a DNA profile compiled from evidence collected at the original scene of the crime. The following year, further genetic genealogy analysis led to the identification of Lancaster resident David Sinopoli as a possible person of interest. Pennsylvania investigators subsequently collected the man's DNA by way of a coffee cup he'd discarded at Philadelphia International Airport. The cup was tested by a Pittsburgh-based laboratory called Cybergenetics, which ultimately linked Sinopoli's genetic material to that of the individual who'd assaulted and murdered Beechler 46 years earlier. In the summer of 2022, Sinopoli was officially taken into police custody on a charge of criminal homicide, to which he pleaded not guilty during a preliminary court hearing. Number 3. Golden State Killer. One of the most infamous serial killers of the 20th century remained unidentified until 2018, 32 years after his span of crimes had come to an end. The so-called Golden State Killer began his spree in Visalia, California, over a period of 20 months starting in 1974. The suspect was believed to have been responsible for roughly 120 burglaries, as well as a murder in the San Joaquin Valley. He then became criminally active in the Sacramento area, but was also linked to several murders, assaults, and burglaries committed all across the state of California, including Contra Costa, Santa Barbara, Ventura, and Orange counties. A number of suspects were identified over the years, with each of them gradually being removed from consideration through DNA evidence, alibi, or other investigative methods. In June of 2016, the FBI announced a renewed effort in the decades-long investigation, which included a $50,000 reward for the Golden State Killer's capture. The prolific criminal's DNA profile was uploaded to the personal genomics website GEDmatch in late 2017. The site identified 10 to 20 individuals with the same great-great-great-grandparents as the Golden State Killer, which law enforcement used to compile an extensive family tree. With the help of genealogist Barbara Ray Venter, 2 possible suspects were established, and after one was ruled out by way of a relative's DNA test, investigators zeroed in on former police officer Joseph James DeAngelo. In April of 2018, the police collected DNA from then 72-year-old DeAngelo's car door handle, as well as from discarded tissue. Both samples were positively matched to the Golden State Killer's DNA profile, leading Sacramento County Sheriff's deputies to finally arrest the long-sought-after spree criminal. DeAngelo couldn't be charged for the majority of his alleged offenses due to the statute of limitations, but he did ultimately face 13 counts of murder, as well as 13 counts of kidnapping. In the summer of 2020, the notorious serial killer was given multiple consecutive life sentences with no chance of parole. In the aftermath of his arrest and conviction, DeAngelo's family publicly indicated that they had absolutely no knowledge of the man's criminal activity, much of which he committed while he was already married and raising his children. Number 2. Stacy Lynn Chahosky. On December the 16th of 1988, members of both the Dade County Sheriff's Office and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation were called to the scene of a dead body found on the northbound lane of Interstate 59, about 5 miles from the Alabama state line. Although investigators were able to determine that the victim was female, they were unable to positively identify her for several years after her remains had been found. The victim's DNA profile was uploaded to a missing persons database during the mid-2000s, but it wasn't until 2022 that the authorities finally broke new ground. With the help of new genealogy investigation methods that had assisted in several other previously unsolved cold cases, Georgia law enforcement identified the woman found on I-59 as Stacy Lynn Chahosky, who'd been reported missing back in January of 1989. A few months after Chahosky was identified, the FBI also named her killer, Henry Frederick Wise, a truck driver who drove through Dade County on his regular route, was linked to Chahosky's killing through genealogy. Wise, who was 34 at the time of the murder, was killed in a car accident at Myrtle Beach Speedway in South Carolina in 1999. He had an extensive criminal record in Florida, Georgia, and North Carolina, including arrest for theft, assault, and obstruction of a police officer. Number 1. Jody Loomis. In August of 1972, a couple drove up a dark dirt path off of Penny Creek Road in Snohomish County, Washington, where they intended to go target shooting. When they exited their vehicle to move a fallen tree that had blocked their path, they came upon a young woman lying on the ground. She'd been disrobed and was suffering from an apparent gunshot wound to the head, which left her unable to communicate with them despite still being alive. The victim was rushed to Stevens Hospital, where she was pronounced dead on arrival. Investigators identified her as 20-year-old Jody Loomis, who'd ridden her bike to the horse stables that night but was accosted, abused, and murdered before she ever reached her destination. Her assailant remained unidentified for nearly 50 years. Following the development of new DNA technology, Snohomish County officials submitted the carefully preserved physical evidence for genetic genealogy identification, which ultimately led police to Terrence Miller. In 2019, then 78-year-old Miller was arrested in Edmonds less than 20 minutes from where the murder had taken place over 4 decades earlier. He was charged with first-degree murder, of which he was found guilty in November of 2020. While the jury deliberated his fate, however, Miller took his own life at his house, where he'd remained during the duration of the legal proceedings, having been freed on a $1 million bond. Thanks for watching. Would you rather give your parents a list of all the wrongdoings you've kept hidden from them, or get written up at work for something your colleague did? Let us know in the comments section below.